So what I'd like to do is take a look at some of the different verses that talk about the subject and kind of just chew over them one at a time, discuss them one at a time, and then when we get through all of them, Old and New Testament references, see if we can then at the end come up with some sort of conclusion based off of what we've discussed and what we've talked about in those verses. We can, okay. We're off to a good start. Some things I do want to point out, because this is kind of a large topic, some of the things we won't be looking at, but we might be able to do in the following weeks. To narrow this down, we are talking today just about self-defense, not about defending other people, not about defending our country and the armed services, not about whether the government has a right to maintain a military. Those are valid questions, valid concerns a lot of people have, but just to have some sort of focus today, I do want to focus just on self-defense. So, starting off with the Old Testament and then working our way eventually through the New, want to start with the book of Exodus in chapter 22. And if someone would like to read in the 22nd chapter, verses 2 and 3, Moses is giving some laws that were to govern ancient Israel. And this is, I think, relevant to our discussion here. Verses 2 and 3 of chapter 22.
If the thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Anyone who steals must certainly make restitution, but if they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for their theft.
Okay. What do you think about that?
I guess I'd want to know why, the difference between night and day.
Certainly a difference from American law. Someone breaks into your house, you have a right to defend yourself no matter the time of the day. Israel's law distinguished between nighttime break-ins and daytime break-ins. If you killed a thief in your house in the daytime, you would be put to death. That's murder. If it happened at nighttime, there was no blood guilt. What do you think that would be?
Should be easier to subdue somebody non-lethally when you can see. They weren't able to just flip on the light and be able to know what they were doing necessarily. They didn't have firearms. They didn't have. They may have had a knife or something, but I think it would have been a lot easier to, even accidentally kill somebody at night when they can't really see very well, and if you're rolling around on the floor or whatever.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I would also wonder about the intent. If there was some consideration given for the intent of the thief. If they're breaking into your house at night, you're probably going to be home. During the day, it's possible that maybe nobody's home, but I would think that they would a lot more malintent would be placed on the breaking and entering person, breaking in at night versus during the day.
And I'm not certainly by any stretch of the imagination an expert on law, but I understand that even in today's law, there's a difference between breaking and entering nighttime and breaking and entering daytime as well. You couldn't see if they had a knife. How do you know they're a thief? Maybe they're coming in to get you, to kill you. Maybe they're just there to take your stuff. It'd be hard to know, as Adam says, during the nighttime. And during the daytime, you can see them too, so even if they get away, you could tell the judges, the magistrates, who the person was if you recognized them. Let's flip over a book to the left there, Genesis chapter 9. Now this is about capital punishment, which kind of goes beyond the boundaries of what we want to accomplish today, but there is something I do want to pull from this in Genesis chapter 9. We've talked about this before, but one of the questions I want to start with early on here is, why is murder bad? Why is murder bad?
the destruction of the image of God.
Probably something you're not going to hear on CNN, is it? You hear something like, well, it's an attack on the individual or something like that, or deprives them of their rights. But the Bible has its own answers, as Josh has already mentioned there, in verse 6. If someone would like to pick that up, chapter 9, verse 6.
Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man.
So again, even though this is on capital punishment, one of the things I want us to keep in mind as we discuss self-defense and its related issues, that when you assault someone, when you attack them or kill them, you are assaulting, attacking, killing someone who is made in the image of God. And that is what God sees as the serious crime. Not saying that the other things are irrelevant, but the main thing that you're doing when you're assaulting another human being is you're attacking someone who's made in the image of God. And God does not have any sense of humor about that. Before we look at the next one, I just want you to think, if you were hanging out with your friend, maybe, I don't know, you were doing some work on your roof. So you're up there maybe putting in shingles, and you're kind of messing around with your buddy, and you kind of nudge him and you elbow him, and to your horror, they fall off the roof and they break their neck down on the way down. It certainly wasn't your intention, you're just messing around. And of course, you do the right thing, you go and you immediately report it to the police, and then they come and investigate. How would our legal system handle something like that, do you think?
Yeah, voluntary manslaughter.
Or would it be considered just an accident?
Depends on the prosecutor.
I think they would search for a motive first to see if there was anything. Well, because like there was a,
But you can still get
You still get manslaughter
like,
charges.
vehicular accidents. You're not intending to hurt somebody, but you can still get charged with involuntary manslaughter.
well, how is that different than, there was somebody that the dad had accidentally like backed a bobcat or a trailer into his son and killed him during a parade or something a while ago. And he said no charges were going to be filed, it was just a freak accident.
I think with vehicular manslaughter, the difference is that you were performing a behavior that was either illegal or would fall under reckless endangerment when it happened. Whereas otherwise it would just be considered an accident. If it's
Yeah,
done-
it
Plus
would be
the-
your process of behavior.
Right.
Plus there's a difference there. The guy doesn't know his kid's behind him, you back over him. You're standing on a roof, you nudge the guy. There needs to be some knowledge that you could knock him off the roof if you're jacking around on the roof. You know what I mean? And so I think that's the difference too.
Does the, I'm not familiar with all this, with how all the legal stuff work, but does the family have any influence on whether charges are filed or not? So, like in a,
Yeah, when my grandparents were hit by a drunk driver, they had the option. They said they didn't want to pursue
Okay.
charges. I don't know if that's the case always, but they did in their case.
They take that, I think they take that into consideration, but
so then in this case, I mean, the dad's not gonna file charges against himself necessarily for.
Or the mom's not going to
Or
file
the
charges
mom,
against
right.
the dad.
But your buddy, like, if the family doesn't particularly like you, then they say, yeah, absolutely, I don't care, they, you know, would that make sense? That
So in that case, the person on the roof, would you expect a punishment of a death penalty to be handed down?
no.
We would look at the motive and say, well, it was maybe foolish to be messing around on the roof, but there was no intent to cause harm there. The Bible has a story, we're going to read about that, about two men who are out in the forest chopping woods, and the handle slips off of the axe, and the axe head goes flying and accidentally kills somebody. And we're going to see how God deals with those kinds of accidental deaths in the book of Deuteronomy. Chapter 19. Verses 4 through 6.
This is the rule concerning anyone who kills a person and flees, therefore safety. Anyone who kills a neighbor unintentionally without malice, afterthought. For instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbor to cut a wood. As he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit his neighbor and kill him. That man may flee to one of these cities and save his life. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is too great, and kill him even though he is not deserving of death, since he did it to his neighbor without malice afterthought.
Okay. And we'll explain a little more of that in a second, but there's another passage that deals with the same situation I'd like to pick up first in the book of Numbers. Towards the end, Numbers 35. Verses 26 through 28. This is kind of an extra information that Deuteronomy didn't include, but Numbers does give a little fuller account of this person who unintentionally killed someone in chapter 35, verses 26 through 28.
If the one who kills someone ever goes outside the border of the city of refuge he fled to, and the avenger of blood finds him outside the border of his city of refuge and kills him, the avenger will not be guilty of bloodshed. For the one who killed a person was supposed to live in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Only after the death of the high priest may the one who has killed a person return to the land he possesses.
So in the Old Testament law, if you killed someone accidentally, in that case of the axe head flying off, you were put under a sentence of death. You could be killed, legally be killed for that. However, God set aside a provision. They were called cities of refuge, and there had to be a certain number in the territories that God gave them in the Promised Land. And if you could make it to that city of refuge before you were caught, then you would be safe. You were under, in essence, house arrest for the rest of your life. If you left that city, as we just read, if you tried to leave, then you would be put to death. You had to stay in there, it says, until the high priest dies, and then you'd be free. So even in the case of an accidental death, we see how seriously God takes the ending of any human life. It's never done trivially. Even in accident, there were serious consequences for that. Very serious. And I want to take a look at one more Old Testament, and then we can kind of wrap this up with some discussion. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did each city have their own high priest? I forget.
There was one high priest for the temple, or before the temple was built, the tabernacle.
So if he died, they were all free?
At that point in time, yeah.
Why? Why would the death of the high priest free everyone?
Puts a time limit on it.
Did he absolve them?
I mean, they don't have prison
That's kind of-
necessarily, so they can go about, and live in a city and be productive citizens still, but they're still confined for a certain number of years. And I imagine, like, the high priest wasn't somebody that was,
Not a
going to
spring
be
chicken.
young, so it's only going to be a few years, I would imagine.
What's temper school?
Hmm.
Forces temper school. For the person who's wronged.
Got it. I see.
In Deuteronomy, it says this person is not deserving of death. But I thought,
In the sense that it wasn't intentional.
right.
But he's clearly, we just read that he is under a death sentence if he leaves the city of refuge before the priest dies.
And two, wouldn't it fall under, like, wouldn't there be some sense of responsibility or accountability to that high priest? And if that high priest dies, then at least the new high priest doesn't have to take on all of that responsibility or accountability of these people.
I don't know, but I don't think I'd leave the city until I was certain everybody knew the high priest was dead.
Fly a plane over with a banner.
Let's just wait
Carry
a couple
around his death
years.
certificate.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
And one other story that we're probably familiar with is in 1 Chronicles.
What's interesting, real quick too, on because you started reading in Numbers 26, right?
Yeah.
Well, in verse 25, it says, "The assembly must protect the one accused of murder from the avenger of the blood and send him back to the city of refuge to which he fled. And, he must stay there until the death of the high priest." It's interesting to me that it sounds like God's putting forth a law that he wants people to help this particular person guilty of the
I
accident.
think the law itself is designed to protect that person rather than designed to be a punishment. Because, at least to me, it's the idea of, to go back to your example of the trailer backing over the child, let's say that it was your friend's child. Does your friend have a legitimate right to grieve about that in a way that presents anger to you? I mean, you did kill his child. And, you know, I at least think in my own life, if someone did that to my child, I would be out for blood, whether or not that was legitimate. And so it's, yes, I do have a deserved grief, but that person didn't mean to do it, and so he shouldn't have to suffer because of my anger and rage. Which is, in the verse it's saying, out of his rage may choose to kill this person even though he doesn't deserve death. So it's a legitimate rage and justice as well as mercy. So
They also live by an eye for an eye too. So, I mean, if someone takes your child, reciprocity, you can take their life. I'm not sure if that exactly applies here, but I think that's the overreaching concept. Am I misinterpreting that? Or?
They did live by an eye for an eye.
Kind of interesting that this whole thing hinges on intent. How does the high priest know? How do the people in the city of refuge know that I didn't just go slit his throat and
that's the next verse in both of the passages is, a man may be accused of blood guilt by multiple witnesses, but never by just one. So you can have a group of witnesses who attest to your intention, but if none do, then you're not guilty.
Okay, so that with this self-defense, we saw a thing in 2020 the other night. This lady sent her child to a Christian camp, and the boy was molested at this Christian camp, and she actually went and killed the guy who molested her child. She was hailed as a hero for doing that. And obviously, she got thrown in jail and subsequently died. But I can see that anger there, and to your point, you have a justified anger and grieving anger, but that doesn't give us in my mind, that's not self-defense. That's, in that kind of situation, we have to follow the laws of the land and let the justice system play out. But what if you caught somebody physically trying to kill your child? Then could you to restrain them? Could you kill them?
I think there's a big difference between defense of self and defense of others. I mean, that's getting us away from our
Which is
topic
why
at
at
hand.
the
but-
beginning I said that we were going to say, it's a fine question, it's an important question, but it's beyond our discussion this week. We can certainly continue it next week. I don't mean to not answer it. 1 Chronicles, chapter 22. You'll remember the story. David, his conscience is bothering him. He's king. He's living in a fine palace, and it occurs to him that the God that he loves, stored in the Ark of the Covenant, living in the Ark of the Covenant, is in a tent. And he thinks to himself, well, that's not right. Here, God's blessed me. I'm in this fancy house. Shouldn't I honor God by building him a temple? And his heart, I think, is certainly in the right place. And so he at first checks in with Nathan, who's a prophet. And Nathan says, God's with you. Whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. And then God later tells Nathan, you need to go back and fix this. And we hear the reason why that David's prevented from building the temple. It's eventually his son Solomon that will get to do it. But why was it that David, a man after God's own heart, was prevented from building the temple? And you might think, well, maybe it was because he was an adulterer. And that's true, he was, but that's not the reason God gives. He was a murderer. He killed Bathsheba's husband. But that's not the reason that God gives. And what reason God does give is recorded in 1 Chronicles, chapter 22, verses 6 through 10. Someone would like to read that paragraph.
Then he called for his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for the Lord, the God of Israel. David said to Solomon, My son, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. But this word of the Lord came to me. You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign. He is the one who will build a house for my name. He will be my son, and I will be his father. And I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever.
So why could David not build the temple?
Shed too much blood.
He's a man of war. Was that sinful? Was he not supposed to do that?
No, he was supposed to. He was guided in all of it and protected. God directed him and in the wars that he went into. And so I don't think God's condemning him here and saying you're awful because you've done this. He's just saying you can't build something that I'm going to rest in when this has happened to you.
Killing all those people, as one commentator said, it left a mark on David. Not sin, it wasn't sin, as Ada says, he was supposed to do those, but God looked at him differently because of that. And it disqualified him from this particular type of ministry. And again, it just shows that, and again, I want to be very clear, it's not a sin what he did, but killing someone made in the image of God is a serious business. It's very serious. And God said, because of that, this ministry is going to pass to your son, who will be a man of peace. So those are some of the Old Testament considerations. And of course, we do need to talk about the New Testament, and we'll do what we can there. But before we turn to the New Testament, just based off of some of those things we've read, what do we think? In light of the Old Testament, what are some of the things we need to take away?
That God judges our heart. He knows our intent in things. And
I don't see any of these specifically referring to self-defense, but they all address the issue that God does not want people to be killed. He does not want his creation to be destroyed. That's why he reconciled us to him, but he does not want his creation destroyed.
We say that, but think about how many times God told warriors to go, or army leaders to go and wipe out a land and kill all the people, women, and children.
But giving the order and wanting that to happen are two different things, right? Like if God could have avoided that, like if he had not given Eve the option to eat the fruit, and sin would never have been in the world, and it would have been perfect. But it happened, so it's not like God wants that. It's, I don't know, anybody?
That's where the free will comes in. So he's having to adjust. He doesn't want us to kill each other, but ultimately because of our free will and the decisions people have made to try to get things right, maybe, he's ordering, like David, to go wipe out.
Which again can make no sense to us because God doesn't adjust. Like he knew, right? I mean, I know what we were saying, well, but it's not like God changed his plan. This was it all
Right.
along.
But God is a just God. He's also a loving God. So when he says these people need to be destroyed, that is the just thing that needs to happen. And he's a loving God. He tries to reconcile us to him as well, but he says these people need to be destroyed. Their hearts have been hardened. Then that is the just thing. That does not mean, though, that we don't exalt people that do that, lift them up, because then that creates a culture of warmongering. And he does not want that to happen. He does not want that to happen, but he has decreed this is what should happen. There's a difference between what God wants and what God says this will happen. So you may have a purpose of doing this, of carrying the sword and killing people, as part of God's decree. But I would not want someone who is trained to kill than necessarily, let's say, teaching my children, because that leaves a mark. It affects other areas.
But you would still have respect and recognize the value of the gift of this leader who God decrees to kill.
Yes.
And God destroyed his own people maliciously. Noah's flood. Sodom and Gomorrah. So, is he guilty of bloodshed too?
Well, maybe this, because what started this whole conversation here is, Dan, what was the question that you asked? You remember? What was it? What's the main theme from what we just read in the Old Testament? The main theme that I took away was God regards life as very sacred, and we are not to mess with that life. And he's put, in the Old Testament, he put laws in place that would illustrate how sacred God considers life. And so that is distinctly different than if God was going to go and instruct David to take down a people. That's aligned with God's purpose. God is the one calling the shots. It's God's creation. God can do whatever he wants with this creation without any explaining. Insofar as we are concerned, God says life is sacred. Don't kill each other.
But in that, I think, like your question back to the self-defense, when he said in the house, like if a thief came in the night, you wouldn't be condemned to death if you killed them. I think that your life is valued by God too, not just the thief's life. And so I think you do have a right to defend yourself, but only to whatever point is necessary to restrain that person, to save life on both ends. That's kind of what I got out of that.
At the same time, Jesus did not defend himself at all. And while we view life as sacred, and it should be, we know that this life isn't all there is either. So death's not the worst. Dying is not, for us to die is not a bad thing.
Jesus didn't defend himself, true, but he did defend, he defended the truth. He defended the truth, but he didn't defend himself from physical harm. He did, however, defend his followers, God's people, by taking out the evil empires. So he did defend others, and he used brutality to do it.
I think an important thing to embrace in all of this is that all of these laws are designed to change the way we think about other people, and not necessarily to think about the justice system, because all of the laws are based on reminding us that anyone who's an assailant is ultimately still a person who's in the image of God, and that however we may feel about the crime that was or was not committed, that person still retains the image of God, whether or not they're guilty. And that our sense of justice should be reminded of that. Reflecting on Jesus, going back to that, he also said, forgive them for they know not what they're doing. I think we also need to be reminded a lot of times when we seek after justice, if we call for blood on that we need to be reminded that that person is also a unique image of God who has value in God's eyes, that's powerful enough that if we were to destroy them, we should be destroyed ourselves. And so I think with the example of the thief law, it's to say, you need to remember that if you don't know what's happening and you have to defend yourself and it's night and you can't see, that's great. You're not going to be guilty. But if it's in the daytime, you know who the person is. You can determine intent, and you don't have to kill that person to defend yourself. And if you do, that's on you, because now you've committed a crime trying to stop it up.
But what it doesn't address there is if he does have a knife and it's coming at you in the daytime.
But you can't be convicted by no witnesses.
But then they're not, then is it even a thief?
It's not a thief, that's a murder, attempted murder. That's the difference. The thief is you're trying to steal something. Coming at you with a knife is not trying to steal
If
something.
they come out with you with a knife, though, in that situation, I would suggest that they would not be guilty of murder, even if it was daytime, that they would not be condemned to death.
You mean like the defending person?
Right.
Right, because you're no longer defending yourself against a thief. He's gone from being a thief to being an assailant.
Okay.
If he's taking your things, you say, take my things, and I'll come for you through the court of
Smile,
justice.
don't look at the picture.
I won't be a party to destroying the image of God,
Right.
because I don't want you to take my stuff.
Right.
And I don't want to destroy you, who you are an image made in the image of God, simply because you want my things. I mean, I think that's, the law is designed to change the way we think as the victim of the crime, rather than necessarily to establish here are things to follow when someone is attacking you.
And from what I understand of our law today, it is even very much maximum necessary force, or the minimum necessary force. So if somebody comes at you with a knife, you can use the amount of force necessary to stop them, but the minute you go beyond the minimum, you are then guilty of doing more than you needed to do. It was
If they walk away.
That's a great line.
If they don't.
Also, you don't shoot them.
them.
Also, you don't shoot them in the back or as they're going out the window. You need to drag them back inside. Is that on tape?
No rock
We can edit that.
Oops.
Yeah, but
Well, and to make it really complicated, this is like a perfect example, because, I need to add this. This is a perfect example of like the Trayvon Martin case. People on both sides of that were out for blood for months, because you have the one that think he's guilty and didn't need to use that much force and he should have the blood on his hands, and you have the others that think he was being assaulted and maybe was about to be killed by having his head smashed in, so he deserved to have that that ultimate destructive defense. And so I think that's what all of this is about. So,
That was also at night.
also at night.
But would you say that to somebody as they were assailing you or taking your stuff? You know what, you're doing this, but I'm not going to do anything to you because you're an image of God. Would you say that to a person that was in your house?
I think that's why we have these conversations. I think that's why you have to think ahead. That's why it's in God's word, so that we can meditate on that and think through how do I respond. And
You're a Christian.
No one-
maybe you won't. Maybe you will just respond. But the more you process it, I think the more likely you are to respond in a biblical manner.
Nowhere does it say you can't adjust their nose. I mean, you can't kill the person, but you can still take down the guy that's trying to rob you. Right? I mean, it doesn't say that you can't stop the guy from stealing stuff from you. You just can't kill the guy.
I think we need to go move this on to next week with the New Testament and see what happens after Christ abolished the law.
All right, very good conversation. As Scott says, this is just, the Old Testament's an important foundation, but we live under the New Testament, of course, and that's what we'll pick up next week. Anyone like to close us in prayer?